So yeah, we're going to talk about saving state with Twine variables. And this is kind of a big, important concept in programming and game design. There's lots of things in a game that we need to keep track of, like the score, what level it is, all sorts of different things. And we refer to these things that we remember using the computer memory as states. And so, we create a state. It's just a concept of like, what have we done? What's happening? What's the score? Whatever. And then we track that, and we also have to, let the player see it if they need to, and so there's a lot of different ways that we need to use it. But let's get something set up real quick that makes sense to use a state. So I'm going to make a very simple Twine story where we have to remember something to enable something else. So I'm going to go over to Twinery. So I'm just going to use this in the browser. You can download the app if you want to. There's not really that big of a difference as far as I can tell. So I'm going to go to use in browser. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, with Twine, there's no backend, there's no user, there's no storage. So you can see that it actually remembers a story that I created, but that's in the local cache of the browser. So it only exists on this computer and really only on this browser. If I open like this same link in an incognito window, it's not going to be there. So just be careful to make sure you save your work as you're going. It will save it as you're working on it, so you can refresh the browser and it'll still be there. But if you leave the computer, especially if it's not your computer, you want to make sure to save it so that it doesn't disappear. Anyway, I'm going to create a new story. I'm going to call this story state example and click create. And if you guys have general Twine questions, like as I'm working, if I do something and you're like, what was that? Just let me know. Just raise your hand or ask. So the way I'm going to set things up, I'm going to kind of go through a few steps, but I'm going to do one thing sort of wrong so that I can then go show how to correct it. But when you're working on it on your own, you might just start in a slightly different way, just to let you know before we get too far down that route. Anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a little story. So I'm going to create this. I'm going to click on this passage, and I'm going to call this my starting point. And I'm going to make a story. Let's make a story about the moon. Did you guys see that we're going to have like a second moon for like a couple months? It's pretty crazy. We're not going to be able to see it, but there's like an asteroid that's going to orbit around the Earth for 2 months and then keep going. So we're going to have a second moon. I think it's just going to get like close enough that it's going to get into the gravitational pull of the moon, and then
it's going to slingshot.
Yeah, then it's going to go on its way.
Exactly how we used to.
How big is the meteor?
It's really small. It's only like, I think it's like 30 feet or something like that. It's like tiny. So there's no way you're going to be able to see it. Or maybe, I don't know if you can see it, but I doubt it. And it's really far away too. It's farther away than the actual moon. Anyway, let's talk about the actual moon. So, I'm going to say you wake up in a dark forest, classic beginning to an interactive story. And let's say you see the moon, and then we're going to give you a choice. You can walk towards the moon, or you can walk away from it. One thing that I'll cover real quick, I think you guys might have, I think a couple of you guys might have done this. I don't know if you talked about it, but when I'm making a link, I can just write whatever I want and it'll make that part of my story. But if I want to name something different from what the link says, I need to use a little arrow. Did you guys do that?
Yeah.
Oh, you did? Okay, sweet. Okay, so I'm going to say walk towards the moon. And I'm going to point this to moon. And then my other option is going to be walk away from the moon. This is just kind of arbitrary. You know, I'm just using this as an example. So if we walk away from the moon, we're going to go to a puddle. Okay. So let's close this. Let's move this over a little bit. Okay. And so what I'm going to do is, in the story, if I go to the moon, what I want to do is I want something to happen in the other page that needs to happen in order to activate something about the moon. So let's say we walk over to a puddle and we see our reflection in the puddle and we realize that we're a werewolf. So knowing that we're a werewolf, when we go back to the moon, we'll be able to howl at the moon. If we don't know that we're a werewolf, then we won't have the option to howl at the moon. So not knowing what we're going to learn today, you could create this. But the way that you would create this is when you get to the moon, it would say, like, you don't see anything. And then if you get to the puddle, you'd have to have a different option that says go back to the moon. But what I want to do is I want to be able to use these pages repeatedly to be slightly more efficient. I don't know how actually more efficient it'll be, but if you had a big story, there are cases where it'll be a lot more efficient. So I want to remember if I've seen my reflection in the puddle when I go back to the moon page. Okay. So I'm going to set up what's called a variable. And I'm going to use it. I'm going to do that using something called a macro. A macro in Twine, in the Harlow default language, is basically like a simplified version of programming in a normal programming language. So it shows us the concepts of programming, but we're not writing the code as code directly. Also, I want to review adding an image. So let's add an image real quick. I think a lot of you guys did this. I don't think it's necessary, but I just want to review it just because I wasn't here last week. So I want to add an image of the moon. I'm going to go to Google and Google Moon. I'm going to go to Images. You might have gone over this. I'm sure you've seen this before. If you're using images or whatever media, make sure to use Creative Commons or public domain or otherwise licensed images so that you know that you're allowed to use it. So I'm going to go to Tools and go to Creative Commons. Well, it doesn't say that. What does it say? Whoops. Okay. Usage rights. I'm going to go to Creative Commons. And so this will show me images that that the creator is licensing for other people to use. This looks pretty good. I'm gonna try to download this, and I don't need a big one. I'm gonna get this like small one, blog size. Okay. Oh, I have to. This is an annoying thing about these services is now I have to log in to download everything. Let's see how easy it is to log in.
Unsplash should allow you to do free downloads without logging in.
Okay.
You just have to make sure that you're using free.
Yeah.
Not the plus.
Okay, let's see what Unsplash has for moons.
Usually my go-to for.
This is pretty good.
Free stock.
Oh, I still can't download it.
That might be a plus one where it's like you have to pay for it.
Okay, I'm just gonna go with this guy. Okay.
Okay, I just figured I'd let you know. Usually, the free stuff off Unsplash, you don't need to sign in.
Okay, so I'm gonna download. Let's do a medium copy of this, and then remember that Twine doesn't have a backend, so I can't upload this anywhere that Twine will let me host it. So what I can do is just use our Open Lab as a sort of backend. So I'm gonna go back to the Open Lab. I'm gonna go up to the dashboard, and I'm not actually putting this in my post. I'm just gonna go to Media, and I'm gonna add the moon file that I just downloaded. So there we go. So I'm just gonna upload this here, so it's hosted, and then I'm gonna click on this, and I'm gonna click copy URL to clipboard right here. And so now I can go back, and the nice thing about Twine is that I can write HTML directly in here, and it'll just render it for me. So you guys probably all learned this in MMP 100 or possibly other places. I'm just gonna do an image tag, src for source equals quotation marks, and then I paste in that link, And then I'm going to say alt equals quotation marks, and I'm going to say a photo of the moon. This is just some alt text. And there we go. So we've got our starting point. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like. Okay. So now I've got, you wake up in a dark forest, you see the moon, walk towards the moon, walk away from the moon. Okay. So now what we want to do is if we go to our puddle, we want to save the fact that we've seen our reflection in the puddle and we've learned that we are a werewolf. And to do this, instead of like creating a whole branch that goes from the puddle after we've learned that we're a werewolf, I'm just going to save a variable. That way I know that I'm a werewolf no matter where else I go in the scene. And as I mentioned before, I'm going to do this in this sort of slightly wrong way first, just so I can show you guys a common problem that you may run into if you haven't, used this before. So in Twine, if I want to use code, if I want to add a macro, I can click on this little macro guy right here. Actually, before we do that, another thing that we want to do if we're going to write some code, there's another thing that we can do here called an HTML comment. You guys probably also learned that in MMP 100, but just to review, if I click one of these, this is a comment, and anything that I write in here is not going to be displayed in the story. It's just notes for me or for other people that I'm collaborating with to understand what the point of a variable or whatever else is here. So here I'm going to say saving my state for if I know I'm a werewolf. This is not a great description, but you basically just want to explain what this variable is doing in longer terms than what you can write with your code. Okay, so then I'm going to write a macro. So I can click on here, or I can just type parentheses. But if I click on macro, it'll give me some options. None of these are the option that I want. I can click on list macros, and this is actually the one that I want, this basic one. But I'm just going to start typing it. So if I make a parentheses, and then I start to type, it's going to give me these options for different macros that you might use. And set is the first one that comes up because it's the most common one that starts with S. And then once we write in there, it gives us this little description of what this does. So it says stores data values in variables. That's what we want to do. So I'm going to make a variable. To make a variable, the only thing I have to be careful about when I'm writing the name of a variable is it has to start with a $sign. Let's put some notes actually for this. So my variable has to start with a $sign. Start with $sign. There can be no spaces or other special characters. And you can't, oh, actually, I don't think it matters here. Normally, you can't start with a number, but I think the $sign negates that. Anyway, you can use any letters, capital or lowercase letters, and any numbers. Letters and numbers, okay. And you can also use underscore. Since we can't use spaces, we replace it with underscore. So a typical variable might look like this, $sign, and then let's say found reflection. Okay, so we're setting this value, this piece of data called found reflection. And when we start the game, it's going to be false. That means that we have not found the reflection. So we're gonna only really use two types of data today. One is true or false, which is called a Boolean variable, a Boolean piece of data. And a Boolean has two values. One is true, the other is false, and that's it. And we have that because it's just very, very simple, so it doesn't take up a lot of space on the computer. You can represent a Boolean with either a 0 or 1, so it's a tiny amount of data on your computer. And so to set this, we just say set found reflection is false. And that's it. We've set a variable. And we can see that variable. We can use that variable in our code. I'm going to not do that for now, but we'll see an example of that a little bit later. Okay, so we have this variable. And so then what we want to do is we want to set our variable to true when we see our reflection in the puddle. But actually, you know what? I am going to display the variable for just a second because it's going to help us understand what's going on. So I'm just going to say found reflection, and then I'm going to display found reflection here. Okay. So, oops. Oh, whoops. Sorry, I was writing Python. Whoops. Okay, I don't want is, I want to. Sorry about that. So in the Harlow language, which is what the macros are written in, we actually want to. So set found reflection to false. Okay. So that kind of makes sense if you just think about it in terms of a statement in English. We're setting found reflection to false. Okay, now if I run this, so we see found reflection, and there's nothing here. Okay. All right. So now if I go to puddle, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say you see your reflection in the puddle. Okay, well, actually, let's say you see a reflection of a werewolf in a puddle, and you realize it is you. Okay, so you've seen your reflection, and so that's what the text will display, but we also want to set our value. So we'll add another macro, and we're going to do set again, but now we're going to set found reflection to true. And I want to make sure I spelled this correctly, so I'm just going to copy this and paste, and it looks the same, so that's good. Okay. And let's display it again. It might actually not display a Boolean. Let's see. Okay. Oh, that's towards the moon. That's not where we want to go. Okay. All right. So now what we're going to do, I'm going to get rid of this. And this is all that has to happen here, but we're going to return to the beginning. So we're going to say return, and we're going to go to start. Okay. And I'm only doing this to show you this error that you might run into, which we're going to fix after we do that. Okay, so now if I start, I'm going to get to walk away from the moon and then return back here. Okay. All right, we're like halfway there. So now we have this state, but now we actually have to do something with it. And that's going to happen on our moon page. So let's go to our moon page, and we're going to say you walk toward the moon. And here is where we use our state. So our state is either that we have found our reflection or we have not. And if we found our reflection, we want to say you can howl at the moon. If we have not found our reflection, then we'll just say you see the moon, there's nothing interesting, you return. So we're going to add a new macro, and this one is if. So it's just if, it's just asking the question if something is true or false. So we're going to say if, and we're going to say found reflection is true. And so if this is true, so we have to add some brackets. And so everything that goes inside these brackets is going to happen if the value is true. And we can space them out a little bit if we want to make it more readable. It doesn't matter.
Be indented?
Like this?
Yeah, no, like in the block of a decision structure, in the block, you know. I have knowledge of coding.
Yeah.
Every decision structure needs to be indented
Like-
in the block.
Like that?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
It works?
It will work. It doesn't care what white space you put around them. But it's not the convention for for what most Twine looks like, but you can write it like that. It doesn't really care.
All right, so I can have an indentation. All right.
Yeah. So if it's true, we're gonna say how. Let's say. Oh wait. Let's just say you see the moon. Or no, you walk toward the moon. Let's say you see. This doesn't really make that much sense, but that's okay. It's just an example. You see the moon and how. Okay. So then after that, we can either say if it's false, or we can just use else. So with binary, with true false, you have like if and then else. So if true, we do one thing. If else, we do a different thing. So we can just say here else. And then we do the same thing. We can put a couple brackets, and everything that happens in those brackets happens else. So else, we say you see the moon, you don't notice anything special. And down here, after that bracket, we're going to put a button to return. So we're going to say return, and we're going to go back to start. Okay. So let's try that out. So I'm going to go to start and press play. And so right now, our found reflection is false. If we go towards the moon, you see the moon, you don't see anything special. So that matches what we would expect because we haven't found the reflection. So we skip this section and we go to else, and that's what gets printed out here. So now we can return, and now we can walk away from the moon. Now we see the reflection, we realize we're a werewolf, and we return. Now here's the problem. So we're gonna walk towards the moon again, but we don't see anything special. So here's the issue that I want to make you guys aware of. So if we think through logically the steps of what happens, we start the game and we set the reflection to false. Then we return to puddle and we set reflection to true. But because there's no direct link from puddle to moon, we have to go back to start. And then we set the found reflection to false. So this is a common error that you'll run into in Twine because of the way it's set up, that we want to set a variable to start, but we don't want to reset it when we go back to that page. So the way that usually we handle this, there's lots of different ways to handle it, but the way that I am going to handle it is I'm going to create a separate page that only sets up my variables. It doesn't have any story or choices. It just sets up my variables and then it shoots me into the story. So let's do that now. So I'm going to move this guy over here. I'm going to create a new passage and put it right here. And I'm going to call this passage initialize. This is just a fancy word for, get started. So in our initialize passage, we're going to set our variable. So I'm going to copy this whole chunk and paste it in here. And then there's another macro we can use to just skip to the beginning of the story. So this macro is just go to. So we can just say go to, and then this data type is called a string. We have to use quotation marks like we do with an image URL to name the passage we want to go to, start. So it looks a little bit different than when we're using the brackets because we're using a different reference to the data. So I want you guys to see that. I'll put a note there to say that. So in macros, passage names go in quotation marks. Okay. So now this initialized passage is where we're going to start. So I'll click on the start story here to move our little guy over there. So now we're going to set our variable, and then we're going to go straight to the start page. So before I forget, I need to go to Start and remove the code here. And if I didn't forget anything, this should all work. So now I'm going to start the game. Okay, so I wake up in a dark forest. I see the moon. I'm going to walk towards the moon. I see the moon. I don't see anything special. I'm going to go back. I'm going to try walking away. I see a reflection of a werewolf in a puddle. I realize it's me. I'm going to return. And now if I walk towards the moon, we see the moon and howl. Okay, great. So we're able to save the state. We're able to change what happens on the page. So again, you don't have to use this in your final project, but I want you to try doing something like this, just to see, just to go through the steps and understand how it works. And I'm recording this, so you'll be able to go back and play it. There's also a million YouTube videos that go over these same things. The one thing to be careful is that you have to make sure you're using Harlow, which is the default language for Twine. There's other languages for Twine, like if you go to Twine and you go to Preferences, or rather Story Formats, you can see there's a few different versions that people use. And we're using Harlow. This is, as it says, the default format for the current version of Twine. So it's relatively new, so a lot of the older tutorials and stuff will have different syntax and whatever. So just make sure you're using Harlow. Anyway, you don't, that's just if you want to look at other examples. Okay. I'm going to go over one more thing. Yeah.
When I put like the return button, it's just striking a new one. It's not linking it back here. I don't know why.
So I'll look at it to make sure later, but what I would guess is happening is this. I think probably what you're doing is going return and then putting like a space like this and then something like that. And if you do that, what it actually does is it creates start with a space in front of it.
Oh.
So sometimes spaces do matter. Spaces don't matter in some cases, but in this particular case, if you have a space there, it interprets that space as part of the name of the passage. I'm guessing that's what's happening, but if it's not that, we can fix it.
No, it didn't. It fixed it.
Okay, cool. Okay.
What piece is your friend?
All right. So, okay, one more thing I want to show you guys. Actually, we are going to cover one more data type, which is numbers. So, again, you don't have to use this, but one question that people are going to ask is like, well, what if I want to count something? What if I want to do something with numbers? So let's just go over that real quick. So let's go back to our initialize passage. And let's say, just for fun, we're going to count how many times we howl at the moon. So I'm going to set another value. I'm going to call this howl_count. So this is going to count how many times we howl. And I'm going to set it to 0. So that's just the number 0. I can just use numbers. It's just a value. It's just going to remember that. And so then if I do howl at the moon, I can change that number. So let's go to our moon passage where that will happen. And so we can put this inside of our if block. So as we add stuff, our code, it gets a little more complex, and we add it together in different ways. So we don't want to howl at the moon just if we get to this page, because we may not know that we're a werewolf yet. So we only want to howl at the moon if we're inside this if statement. Okay. So if we howl at the moon, we're going to say set howl count to. Now here's a little tricky thing, but it's useful, and it's something that if you do more programming in another class or in other contexts, you're going to run into a lot. We're going to take the howl count and then we're going to add to it. The way that we do that is we say set the howl count, that value, to it. So it refers to the howl count, whatever the current number is, so it's 0. So we take 0 and we add 1. So we're just going to say it plus 1. And then we're going to add an if in an if. This got a little more complicated, but that's okay. we're going to add an if and an if. So if we have more than one, let's tell the player that they've howled multiple times. So we're going to say here, if howl count, and we can use like greater than or less than to compare numbers. So if the if 1 is greater than 0, whatever. So let's say if howl count is greater than 1, we have a new if, and then this is kind of what Elijah was referencing. In most programming languages, if you saw something like this, you would want to move it over like this so you can tell that this is inside of this. Again, in Twine, you don't really see that as often, but you can do this if you want. But I'm going to actually take it out just to avoid overcomplication for now. And maybe I'll add a couple comments in here. So if howl count is greater than 1, we're going to say you howled, and then we're going to say howl count times. And so when we use the variable here, it's actually going to display whatever that number is, inside that text. And so now, this is the last thing we're going to do. Let's let the user howl again so that we can see this go up. So we're going to say howl again, and we're going to point this to itself. So we're going to point this back to the moon, and so we'll just see that number go up. Okay, so let's add a couple comments here just to make sure we remember what these are. Okay, so if macro makes displays content based on the variable state, and then one thing you can do is you can use comments to say like what this is. So this is the end of if howl count. I don't have to use the same syntax because this is just a comment. And then for this one, I'll say end of if found reflection. And then I'll put another comment here that says else handles, or what's a good way to put this? I feel like I'm making this more complicated. Else is for when if is false. Okay, so else happens if when if is false. Okay. Let's try this. Let's go to build. Okay, so we have to walk away from the moon and see the puddle. We know we're a werewolf. Now we can walk towards the moon. You see the moon and howl. Oh, I didn't. Okay, I missed something. Oh, you know what? This howl again should not be inside the howl count. So you have to be a little bit careful about the order of these things, because if that's inside this if statement, we won't see it the first time. So let's try it one more time. Okay, so now we can howl again, and if we howl, we're gonna just see that number increase each time we do it. Although this should be times, not time. Okay. So those are a few different types of variables. You don't have to use numbers. You don't have to use true, false. You can kind of choose one or the other depending on what you think you might want to use it for. But yeah, there's just a couple examples to get you guys started. And if you want to, again, you don't have to use this for the final version, but I want you to try using it at least once. So I'm going to do a little bit of documentation before I turn it over to workshop time, but I'm going to save this so you guys can use it. So I'm going to export this as a TWE file. And I don't know if you guys have looked at the TWE files. but they're really just text. If I open this in Sublime Text, you can see most of it is just like some information about what it is. And then you can see that most of this is actually just the stuff that I wrote into it. So when you save a twee, the reason you do that is because you can load it up into Twine and it just recreates it really quickly. What we'll do next week is, whoops, I shouldn't be trying to do this at the same time. What we'll do next week is we'll actually publish it and put it on itch.io. Anyway, so I have my twee file. Maybe I can I upload a twee file here? No, I can't. It's a good way to share that. I'll think of a way to share it, and I'll link to it later. So yeah, I'll share that with you guys so you can look at that code. Okay, so now I want to do a little bit of documentation. And I'm going to show you guys a couple of things that I usually do when I'm doing documentation. And I'll go over posting, and this is kind of review, but just to do it real quick. So I'm usually what I like to do is I'm going to take the project that I'm working on, I'm going to put it in a separate window like this. If you're in Chrome or really any window, if your window is not the same size as your browser, you can go like this and it'll fill it up. But you may not want to do that. You guys may have more resolution on your screen and may be too big. So it depends on what you're working on. So then I want to make sure when I document this that you can see the sort of most important part of what I'm working on. So I'm going to kind of make sure to show this part of it. And then I have some space over here. So maybe I'll show like the initialize section. And just show the stuff that's important for what you're documenting for that project. So for this project, I want to show that I'm using these variables. So I may want to show like, this section, there's no variables here. So I might skip that. And, this has a variable in it, but it's not, that's it. So I'll probably just show this, and then a preview of what it looks like. So when I'm taking a screenshot, it seemed like you guys didn't really have much of a problem with that, but just to show you how I usually do it, on the Mac, there's ways to do this on PC as well, which I'll show you where to find that in a second. But on the Mac, what you can do is hold Command-Shift-4, and it brings up this little target guy, and then you can draw a box with this, and it'll make an image, but you can also change it to a little camera if you hit the space bar, and then that'll take an image of the window that you currently have that you're looking at, whatever application it is. This will look good because you'll see the context for it. You may not want that, and so you can use a different approach, but that's usually what I do. So I'm going to click this. It's going to make a little screenshot down here. If I want to preview that, I can click on it. It looks fine. One thing that you'll notice is it has a little shadow in the background. That's kind of the default for the Mac. If you like that, that's great. If you don't like that, there's a way to get rid of it. I'm going to click done here, and it's going to go to my desktop, and we're going to find it in a second. Okay, so now if I do Command-Shift-4, I get my target, I hit space. Now if I hold Option and click again, I'm going to get the same image, but no shadow. So I'm going to do that. Here's that image. You can see it goes all the way to the edges. It's really just a matter of preference. Okay, so we'll click done here. Now I'm going to open up my moon with my really complicated, crazy code, and I'm going to take a screenshot of that. And then I'm going to hit play, get rid of this, and I can't really see this whole thing, but I'm just going to screenshot this part. I don't really need to do the whole thing. So I'm just going to screenshot this. My mouse is lagging. Okay, so now I've got 3 screenshots. I'm ready to make my blog post. Let's get rid of this guy. And let's get rid of this guy. And I'll put this back over here. So I'm going to go to Open Lab and go to New Post. And I got to log in. Okay. So I'm ready to make a new post. I want to kind of organize things a little bit, just so, you know, if I lose these images, I can, or if I lose the post, I can redo it. So I'm gonna go to my downloads folder, and here I have, I don't really need the moon image anymore. These are some old thumbnails. I have my Twee file, and on my desktop, I have my 3 screenshots. So let's drag my Twee file over here so they're all together. Here's my MMP 270 folder. I've got some art that I made before. These are my class recordings, so we can ignore that. I'm gonna make a new folder called Twine. Just call it Twine, that's fine. And then I'm gonna drag this Twee file in there. And then I'm gonna name my screenshots just so I don't have to waste a bunch of time you know, looking for them later. I have these screenshots. This is the shadow example. You can see shadow, no shadow. You know, again, it's just personal preference. I'm gonna delete the shadow, and I'm gonna call this initialize. And I might put like, we're in week 3. I might put like week 3 here, just so I know what it's from. And then this is moon, week 3. And then this is preview, week 3. It really doesn't matter that much what you call these things, just as long as you know what it means, that's fine. So I'm gonna put these guys in here. And then I'm gonna make a new folder called documentation. You know, you may wanna put your images in the Twine folder. I like to keep things in different places, so I'm gonna make a documentation folder, and I'm just gonna drag these guys over there. So now I know where everything is. I can make my post. I don't have to look for stuff. I know exactly what I want. So I'm gonna go back to Chrome, and I'm gonna say this is Twine state progress. And I'm gonna add my images. So I'll just go to image, upload, and go to my desktop, MMP 270, documentation, and I'll start with initialize. And then you know, you guys did a really good job writing about what you've been working on and explaining the concept for your story. So let's keep that up. So we don't need a ton of information. We just need to explain to somebody who has no idea what this is, what they're looking at. So we're gonna say, I added some variable initializations. How do you spell that? Initializations to save the states for the player finding their reflection and the number of times they howl at the moon. Okay. And so let's add another image. I'm gonna drag and drop this one. So I'm gonna move this down or over here and go to moon. And I'm just gonna write here okay, let's say on the moon page, the player can howl at the moon if they have already found their reflection. Okay, so just a simple explanation of what we're looking at. And then I'm gonna add the last image. I'll just drag and drop. This is my preview. And that's pretty much it. So let's take a look at that, make sure it looks good. So I'm gonna preview the post. Okay. And I'm gonna publish. And just as a review, once I publish this, I want to submit it on Brightspace. So I'm going to copy this link. I'm going to go over to Brightspace and let's go to Learner View for a moment. I'll go to Assignments. I'll go to, this is our 3rd blog assignment. And I'll make sure I did everything in the rubric. And I'll paste in my link and click Submit. Okay, so that's everything that we need to do. I'm gonna find a place to upload this example so you guys can look at it if you want to. And that's it for now. So Let me know if you have any questions or you need help with anything, and I'll take a look. Yeah.
I just want to help, like actually do that because for some reason I'm trying to keep the example here.
Yeah.
And recreated it, and it's just not working out for some reason.
Okay, I'll take a look at it. So yeah, let me know if you're having any issues, and I'll come take a look. And yeah, you can continue working.
I have a question. Is this the same for assignment 1 and 2?
Which part?
Well, let's see here. I signed out like an idiot.
Do you mean the avatar post that we did?
Oh, so that's for assignment 1, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And what about assignment 2?
Assignment 2 is just sort of like the first steps in the Twine project.
All right.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, you guys can get to work and let me know if I can help with anything.